I never imagined my life would end up like this. Played out in public, dissected by strangers who didn't know the first thing about me or my marriage. But that's what happens when your husband is famous. Everything is a spectacle. Everything is magnified. For years, I had been the picture-perfect wife to David, the superstar everyone adored. We had it all. A beautiful home, 2 amazing kids, and a relationship that looked rock solid from the outside. David's career had skyrocketed, and as much as I loved him, I knew that fame came with its own challenges. People throwing themselves at him, parties, the endless travel, but I trusted him. I had to. What I didn't realize was how fragile that trust really was, or how quickly it could be shattered. It all started innocently enough. David and I were invited to this huge party hosted by none other than Diddy. It was one of those high-profile events, full of celebrities, flashing cameras, and overpriced champagne. I had gotten used to those gatherings over the years, blending into the background while David worked the room, his natural charm on full display. I never minded it. He was a social butterfly, and I was happy to support him. That night, though, something felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. David had been distant lately, distracted even when he was home. He'd tell me it was the stress of his upcoming projects, the constant pressure of staying at the top, and I believed him. But at the party, I noticed the way he was glued to his phone, slipping into corners to text when he thought I wasn't looking. Still, I brushed it off. I had no reason to doubt him, but that was about to change. A few days after the party, I started noticing whispers online. At first, they were nothing more than blind items on gossip sites. Vague rumors about a famous actor having an affair. I didn't think much of it, but something about the timing made my stomach turn. David had been more absent than usual, his explanations feeling thinner with each passing day. Then came the bombshell. Diddy posted a picture on Instagram from the night of the party, an innocent group shot with David, a few other celebrities, and her. I didn't recognize her at first, but the internet did. It didn't take long for fans and tabloids to start digging. She was an up-and-coming model, someone who had been seen in the same circles as David recently, but I hadn't thought much of it. They moved in the same industry. It wasn't unusual for their paths to cross. What was unusual was the way people started connecting the dots. Photos from the party, strange coincidences, and suddenly, everyone had a theory. I tried to stay away from the speculation, telling myself it was just noise. But when Diddy casually mentioned in an interview that there was a lot of energy between certain people at the party, it all clicked. The energy he was talking about wasn't between David and me. It was between David and her. The night it all came crashing down was a blur. I was sitting in our living room, scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself from the growing storm of rumors, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from a close friend in the industry. Someone I trusted, someone who wouldn't lie to me. "I thought you should know." The message read, followed by a link to a new article. I clicked it, my heart pounding in my chest. There it was, clear as day. Photos of David and the model, not just at the party, but leaving together later that night, getting into a car, and heading to some private after-party. My stomach dropped. There were pictures of them laughing, touching, far too close for it to be innocent. Suddenly, everything made sense. The distance, the late nights, the vague excuses. He hadn't just been stressed. He had been seeing her. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to feel anything other than the numbness that was creeping over me. I stared at the photos, unable to look away, even as the tears blurred my vision. My perfect life, my perfect marriage. It was all a lie. David came home later that night, oblivious to what had just been exposed. I could hear the keys jingle in the lock, the sound of him stepping into the house, calling my name like nothing had happened. Like he wasn't hiding a secret that had just been splashed across every gossip site on the planet. I confronted him as soon as he walked into the room. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice trembling, holding up my phone with the damning photos on display. He froze, his expression shifting from confusion to panic in an instant. He tried to deny it at first, but the look in his eyes gave him away. He knew he was caught. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice strained. "We were just hanging out. Nothing happened. But I wasn't an idiot. The pictures, the rumors, the way he'd been acting. It all added up. I had been trying to convince myself otherwise, but there was no denying it anymore. "You've been lying to me," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and betrayal. "All this time, you've been seeing her behind my back, haven't you?" David opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. I couldn't stand to hear more excuses, more lies. I stormed past him, grabbing my keys and leaving the house before he could stop me. I needed space. I needed to think. The next few days were a nightmare. The story exploded online, thanks to Diddy's casual remark, the pictures, and the endless speculation. Everywhere I turned, there were headlines about David's secret affair, about how his picture-perfect marriage had been nothing more than a facade. I couldn't escape it. Friends, family, even strangers bombarded me with messages, some offering support, others feeding into the gossip. It felt like my entire life was unraveling, piece by piece, in front of the whole world. David tried to do damage control. He made a public statement, claiming the rumors were exaggerated, that it was all blown out of proportion. But the damage was already done. Our private life had become public fodder, and I didn't know how to stop it. I had always been the supportive wife, the one who stood by him through everything. But this was too much. I couldn't handle the humiliation, the betrayal. It was like I had been living in a fantasy, believing we had something real, only to realize that David had been playing a different game all along. For weeks, I stayed out of the spotlight, avoiding the media, the questions, the prying eyes. I needed time to process, to figure out what came next. My trust in David was shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Eventually, David and I had the conversation I had been dreading. He admitted to the affair. Not just a one-time mistake, but something that had been going on for months. He begged for forgiveness, swore he still loved me, that he wanted to fix things. But I couldn't listen. Not anymore. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in a marriage where I was constantly second-guessing everything, wondering if I was ever enough. The trust was gone, and without that, there was no foundation left. So I made a choice. I walked away. The media continued to speculate, to twist the story, but I stopped caring. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me finding my strength, reclaiming my life. I wasn't just David's wife anymore. I was me, and I was going to figure out who I was without him. It's been months since the scandal broke, and while my life has changed in ways I never imagined, I found a sense of peace I didn't think was possible. The gossip eventually died down, the headlines moved on to the next big story, and I've started rebuilding slowly but surely. David and I are no longer together. He continues to live in the spotlight, while I've chosen a quieter path, focusing on myself, on my kids, and on the things that truly matter. It hasn't been easy, but I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. Diddy's party may have been the catalyst for my world falling apart, but in a strange way it also set me free. Free from the lies, the expectations, the pressure to be something I wasn't. Now I'm ready to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I'm doing it on my own terms. Life without David wasn't easy at first. After over a decade of marriage, our lives had been so intertwined that it was hard to separate myself from him in any real way. Every room in the house carried a memory. The couch where we used to binge-watch movies, the kitchen where he'd try and fail to cook, and even the kids' rooms. All of it felt like remnants of a life that had been ripped apart in an instant. The hardest part was figuring out how to explain everything to our children. They were too young to understand the complexities of betrayal and infidelity, but old enough to know that something was wrong. I tried to shield them from the gossip as best as I could, but kids hear things. At school, on the internet. Questions came, difficult ones, and I had to be the one to answer them. "Why isn't Dad staying with us anymore?" my daughter asked one evening, her wide eyes filled with confusion. She was only 8, and the innocence in her question tore me apart. I sat her down, carefully choosing my words, not wanting to paint David as a villain, even though I had every reason to feel that way. Sometimes, grown-ups have problems that they need to work out, I told her softly. And right now, your dad and I need some space to figure things out. But no matter what, we both love you very much. It was the truth, at least the part one could share with her. I didn't want to burden my children with the complexities of our situation, but it was hard to hide my pain from them. Some days, it felt like I was going through the motions of being a mother, barely holding myself together just for them. On the inside, though, I was still breaking. David tried to be present for the kids, visiting often and keeping up appearances. He was always the fun dad, the one who could swoop in and make everything seem like a grand adventure. But behind the smiles, I could see the strain on his face too. He knew he had destroyed something precious, and part of me could tell he was grappling with the guilt in his own way. But guilt wasn't enough to fix what was broken. One of the worst parts of being married to someone famous is that your private life is never truly private. Even after I had decided to end things with David, the media continued to circle like vultures, hungry for more drama. They didn't care that I was just a woman going through the worst experience of my life. They wanted scandal, and they were determined to get it. For weeks after the affair was exposed, I couldn't step outside without someone shoving a camera in my face. Headlines blared from every gossip site imaginable. Superstar's marriage in tatters. David's secret affair with model revealed. Wife speaks out about the betrayal. Except I hadn't spoken out at all. I refused to give any interviews, no matter how tempting it was to tell my side of the story. The temptation to throw David under the bus, to lash out at him publicly for what he had done, was strong at times. But I knew that if I went down that road, it would only prolong the circus. And besides, I didn't want my children to grow up and read about their parents tearing each other apart in the media. They deserved better than that. Still, the pressure was relentless. Reporters followed me to the grocery store, to the kids' soccer practices, even when I went out for a simple cup of coffee. At one point, I had to have security come with me just to get some privacy. It was overwhelming, suffocating, and at times, I felt like I was losing myself in the chaos. But through it all, I kept reminding myself of one thing. I was going to survive this. I didn't know how yet, but I refused to let the media, or David, or anyone else dictate the story of my life. I had more control than I gave myself credit for. I just had to find my voice again. After the dust settled and the media frenzy began to fade, I was left with the reality of being on my own for the first time in years. It was a strange, unsettling feeling at first. I had defined myself so much as David's wife that I wasn't sure who I was without that title. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone in the house after the kids had gone to bed, I realized that this was my chance to rediscover myself.
I started small.
I enrolled in a painting class, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. I started going for long walks, clearing my mind, trying to reconnect with the person I had been before David and the fame had consumed my life. It was liberating, but also terrifying, to confront the parts of myself I had buried over the years. But as I did, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't an overnight transformation. There were still plenty of nights when I cried myself to sleep, overwhelmed by the loneliness and the loss of the life I had known. But slowly, I began to find strength in the little things. The joy of learning something new, the comfort of spending time with friends who supported me, and the quiet satisfaction of building a life on my own terms. For years, I had put David's career, his dreams, his life before my own. Now, I had the chance to focus on what I wanted. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that was something I could embrace. Months passed, and I began to rebuild my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. The public's attention shifted to the next big scandal, and the constant media presence eventually disappeared. I finally had the space to breathe, to think, and to plan for the future. One day, while having lunch with an old friend, the idea of starting my own business came up. It had been a fleeting thought in the back of my mind, something I never felt brave enough to pursue when I was so wrapped up in David's world. But now it felt like the perfect time. I decided to open a small boutique, a mix of fashion and home decor, curated with things that I loved. It wasn't just about selling products. It was about creating a space where I could pour my creativity into something meaningful, something that was entirely mine. The process wasn't easy. Starting a business from the ground up was full of challenges I hadn't anticipated. But I found that I thrived under the pressure. Every small victory, finding the perfect location, securing a business loan, working with designers, felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity. When the boutique finally opened, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. Friends, family, and even some of my old acquaintances from David's world showed up to support me. It was a small space, but it was beautiful, filled with items that reflected who I was and what I valued. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet, not as someone's wife but as me. It took a long time, but eventually, David reached out to me with a genuine apology. He had tried before, in the heat of the scandal, to make amends, but it always felt performative. More about saving face than truly making things right. But this time was different. We met in a quiet cafe, far from the cameras and the chaos that had surrounded us for so long. He looked tired, worn down by everything that had happened, but there was a sincerity in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I messed up," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I know I can't take it back, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly." I sat there for a long time just listening. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the resentment and the pain he had caused. But another part of me, perhaps the part that had grown stronger in the months since I left, knew that holding on to that anger would only keep me stuck in the past. "I appreciate that," I finally said, my voice calm. "But this isn't about forgiveness. It's about moving on." David nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "I hope you find happiness, Emma," he said quietly. "You deserve it." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, I'm amazed at how far I've come. The woman I was when I first found out about David's betrayal feels like a distant memory. Someone who was lost, broken, and unsure of herself. Now I'm stronger. I've built a life I'm proud of, one that isn't defined by someone else's fame or success. My boutique is thriving, my kids are happy, and I found a sense of peace that I never thought possible. There are still moments when the past creeps up on me, when I think about the life I had with David and the dreams we shared. But those moments don't hold the same power over me anymore. They're just memories, part of a chapter in my life that has come to a close. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I'm not afraid of it. For the first time in years, I'm excited about what comes next. Whether it's expanding my business, traveling with my kids, or simply enjoying the quiet moments of life, I'm ready for whatever the future brings. Because now, I know that no matter what happens, I'm enough. And that's all I need. In the years since the affair and the scandal that followed, my life has taken turns I never expected. I've grown in ways I didn't think were possible, finding strength and resilience in the face of heartbreak. David and I remain cordial for the sake of our children, but our lives have gone in completely different directions. He's still in the public eye, navigating the ups and downs of fame, while I've chosen a quieter, more private path. It's funny how different our lives look now, compared to where we started. As for me, I found love again. Not in the flashy, all-consuming way that defined my relationship with David, but in a quieter, more stable form. It's not something I was looking for, but sometimes life surprises you when you least expect it. Looking back, I can see that the affair, the betrayal, the public humiliation, it was all part of a journey I needed to take to find myself again. It was painful, messy, and heartbreaking, but in the end, it led me to a place of peace and fulfillment. And for that, I'm grateful. Falling in love again was something I never anticipated. After everything I'd been through with David, I thought the door to that part of my life was firmly shut. I wasn't bitter, but I had convinced myself that I didn't need a romantic relationship to be happy, that I was fine on my own, and in many ways I was. I had found fulfillment in raising my kids, running my boutique, and finally living life on my terms. But life, as it often does, had other plans. I met Jack at a charity event I attended on a whim, more to support a friend than out of any real interest in being there. It was a small, intimate gathering far removed from the celebrity-filled galas David and I used to frequent. I liked the simplicity of it. No cameras, no flashing lights, just people coming together for a good cause. Jack wasn't flashy or larger-than-life like David. In fact, he was almost the opposite. He was quiet, steady, with an easy smile that made me feel comfortable right away. We were seated next to each other at dinner, and what started as polite conversation quickly turned into something more meaningful. He asked me about my boutique, about the things I was passionate about, and he really listened. It had been a long time since I felt that kind of connection. We exchanged numbers that night, but I wasn't sure if anything would come of it. I was hesitant. After all, my heart had been through enough, and the idea of opening myself up to someone new felt daunting. But Jack was patient. He didn't push, didn't demand more than I was ready to give. He was simply there, and over time I found myself drawn to him in a way that surprised me. Trust was a tricky thing for me after David. Even though Jack hadn't done anything to make me doubt him, I found myself questioning everything in the beginning. It wasn't fair to him. I knew that, but the scars from my past were still fresh, and I couldn't shake the fear that history might repeat itself. One night, after we had been seeing each other for a few months, Jack noticed I was being distant. We were sitting on my porch, the kids asleep inside, and he gently asked, "Are you okay? You've been a little quiet tonight." I hesitated, unsure of how to explain what I was feeling. But then I remembered the promise I had made to myself after David. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to bury my emotions just to keep the peace. "It's not you," I said finally, taking a deep breath. Sometimes I find it hard to trust. After everything with David, it's like there's always this voice in the back of my mind telling me not to get too comfortable, not to let my guard down. Jack was quiet for a moment, and I could see him processing what I had said. Then he reached over, gently taking my hand in his. "I get it," he said softly, "and I don't expect you to just forget everything that's happened. But I want you to know that I'm not him. I'm not going to hurt you like that." There was something about the way he said it, so calm, so certain, that made me believe him. He wasn't trying to rush me into anything, wasn't making promises he couldn't keep. He was just offering me his patience and understanding, and in that moment, I realized how much I appreciated that. Trusting Jack wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a gradual process, one that took time and effort on both our parts. But as the months went by, I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't thought possible. He never pushed me, never demanded more than I could give. Instead, he gave me the space to heal, to learn to trust again at my own pace. And for the first time in years, I felt what it was like to be in a relationship that didn't require me to compromise myself. As Jack and I grew closer, I started introducing him to the people who mattered most. My kids. That was a big step for me, and I was nervous about how they would react. They had been through a lot with the divorce, and I didn't want to complicate things by bringing someone new into their lives unless I was sure it was the right decision. But Jack, as always, was patient. We took things slowly, letting the kids get to know him little by little. He didn't try to take on the role of their father. He knew that was David's place, but he was kind and attentive, and before long, they started to warm up to him. My daughter, who had always been more reserved, began asking him about his job and his interests, while my son, younger and more eager, invited him to play soccer in the yard. It was a relief to see them happy, to see that they were adjusting to the new normal in our lives. There were still challenges, of course. Co-parenting with David wasn't always easy, and the logistics of managing two households could be complicated. But with Jack by my side, I felt more capable of handling it all. We were becoming a team in the best possible way. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Jack and I sat outside, enjoying the quiet of the night. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was cool with the first hints of fall. "I've been thinking," Jack said, his voice soft, "about the future." I looked over at him, curious. "What about it?" He smiled, a little nervous, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made my heart flutter. "I want to be in it. Your future, I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know that I'm serious about us. I'm not going anywhere." For a long time, I had been afraid to think about the future. afraid of what it might hold, afraid that I might get hurt again. But sitting there with Jack, I realized that the future didn't scare me anymore. Not with him. I want that too, I admitted, my voice steady and sure. I want you to be part of my life. Our lives. Jack's smile widened, and he reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. Good. Because I'm in this for the long haul. And just like that, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Peace I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes from knowing that no matter what the future holds, you're not facing it alone. As the months passed, our lives continued to intertwine in ways that felt natural, unforced. Jack became a steady presence in my world, not just for me, but for my kids as well. He was there for the little things, the school plays, the soccer games, the everyday moments that made up the fabric of our lives. And slowly, we began to feel like a family. David, for his part, had moved on as well. We had found a way to co-parent that worked for us, even if our relationship was still strained. He was still living the celebrity life, still in the public eye, but we had reached a place where we could at least communicate civilly for the sake of the kids. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, after we had put the kids to bed, Jack and I sat down to talk about the next steps in our relationship. We had been dating for over a year by that point, and things were going well. Better than I ever could have imagined when we first met. I've been thinking, Jack said, his tone thoughtful. What if we made this official? I raised an eyebrow, curious. Official how? Jack smiled, a little sheepish, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. What if we moved in together? You, me, and the kids. I love being a part of your lives, and I think it's time we take that next step. But only if you're ready. I hadn't expected the question, but as soon as he asked, I knew my answer. It felt right, like the next natural step in the journey we had been on together. I'm ready, I said softly, my heart full. Let's do it. And just like that, a new chapter of our lives began. One filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future we were building together. As I look back on everything that has happened, the betrayal, the public scandal, the heartbreak, I realize how far I've come. The woman I was when I found out about David's affair feels like a distant memory. Someone who was lost in a world that no longer fit. But through it all, I found strength, resilience, and most importantly, I found myself. Jack and I have created a life together that I'm proud of. It's not always easy, blending families never is, but we've built something real, something grounded in love and respect. My kids are happy, thriving, and I feel more at peace than I ever thought possible. David remains a part of our lives, but in a different way now. We've both moved on, and while there will always be a connection between us because of the kids, I no longer feel the weight of our past hanging over me. I've let go of the anger, the hurt, the disappointment, and in doing so, I've found freedom. Looking ahead, I feel a sense of excitement about the future. For the first time in years, I'm not afraid of what's to come. I've learned that life is unpredictable, full of twists and turns you can't always see coming. But I also know that no matter what happens, I'm strong enough to face it. I've built a life that is mine, one filled with love, joy, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing who you are and what you want. And that, I think, is the greatest gift of all. In the years since everything fell apart, I've discovered that life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I never thought I'd find love again, but I did. I never thought I'd be happy without David, but I am. I never thought I'd feel this strong, this capable, this whole, but I do. The woman I've become is someone I'm proud of. She's resilient, she's courageous, and most importantly, she's free. Free to love, free to live, free to be herself. And that, I've learned, is the greatest freedom of all. As the months turned into years, the life I had built with Jack became my new normal, and I realized that the peace I had found wasn't fleeting. It was real, rooted in the everyday moments we shared together. I had grown so much from the woman who felt broken and betrayed, and now, I was thriving in ways I hadn't even thought possible. Jack and I settled into the rhythm of our blended family. It wasn't always seamless, of course. There were bumps in the road, moments of miscommunication, and the challenges that come with merging two families. But Jack had a way of smoothing things over, always stepping in with patience and a calming presence when things got tough. He understood that my kids were my world, and he treated them with the same love and care he gave to me. One Saturday morning, while we were having breakfast with the kids, Jack looked over at me with a smile. He had that mischievous look in his eyes, the one that always made me laugh. "What's that smile for?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Jack shrugged, sipping his coffee. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." The kids groaned playfully, rolling their eyes at our little moment. They had grown used to seeing us together like this, happy, comfortable, a unit. I smiled back at Jack, feeling that same warmth spread through me. It was the simple moments like this that I cherished the most. The mornings filled with laughter, the quiet evenings on the porch, the love we shared without the need for grand gestures. As life continued, I felt more secure than ever in the life Jack and I had built together. We had found a way to merge our worlds, to create a home where love and trust were the foundation of everything we did. Felt like everything had finally fallen into place. One evening, Jack and I were sitting outside under the stars, a glass of wine in hand, and the sounds of the summer night filling the air. It had become our little tradition, to sit together after the kids were asleep, just the two of us, talking about the day or simply enjoying the quiet. That night, though, something felt different. Jack seemed a little more serious than usual, and there was a tension in the air, a nervous energy that I couldn't quite place. "What's on your mind?" I asked, leaning into him. He hesitated for a moment, then turned to face me fully, taking both of my hands in his. "There's something I've been thinking about for a while," he began, his voice soft but steady. "We've built this incredible life together, and I've never been happier. I love you, Emma, and I love our family, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." My heart skipped a beat as I realized where this was going, but I stayed quiet, letting him finish. Jack took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small box. "I know we've both been through a lot, and I know that this isn't something to take lightly, but I want you to know that I'm all in whatever challenges come our way. I'm here for the long haul. So, Emma, will you marry me?" I stared at the ring in the box, a mix of emotions flooding through me. Love, joy, and a little bit of fear of letting myself be vulnerable again, of opening my heart to the possibility of something going wrong. But as I looked into Jack's eyes, I knew that this was different. This wasn't like before. Jack wasn't David. He wasn't going to betray me, and more importantly, I had grown enough to know that I could handle whatever life threw at me. A smile spread across my face, tears welling up in my eyes as I nodded. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jack grinned, slipping the ring onto my finger before pulling me into his arms. It felt like a weight had been lifted, like this moment was the culmination of everything we had worked for, everything we had built. I had found love again, real love, and I wasn't afraid to embrace it. As the weeks went by, we started planning the wedding. It wasn't going to be anything extravagant. After all, neither of us wanted the fuss that came with a big event. We had both been through enough in our lives to know that what mattered wasn't the size of the ceremony, but the commitment we were making to each other. The kids were excited, though they tried to play it cool at first. My daughter, always the practical one, asked a million questions about the logistics, where we would have it, what the dress would look like, whether or not she had to wear heels, which she hated. My son, on the other hand, just wanted to know if there would be cake. We decided to keep it simple, a small ceremony with just family and close friends in our backyard. The day of the wedding was perfect, clear skies, warm sun, and the feeling of love all around us. As I stood there in my dress, looking at Jack waiting for me at the end of the aisle, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was it. This was the life I had fought so hard to build. And as I took Jack's hand, exchanging vows that felt deeply personal and true, I knew that this time, it was for keeps. Married life with Jack was everything I had hoped for and more. We continued to navigate the complexities of blending our family, but it felt like we were doing it together, as a team. The kids were happy, thriving, and our home was filled with laughter, love, and a sense of stability that I hadn't felt in years. David, for his part, had moved on as well. He had remarried to a woman in the entertainment industry, and while our relationship remained cordial for the sake of the kids, we both understood that our lives had diverged in ways that could never be reconciled. There was no bitterness between us anymore, just acceptance of what had been and what now was. As time passed, Jack and I continued to build our life together. We traveled with the kids, explored new places, and created memories that I knew would stay with us forever. The boutique I had opened years ago continued to thrive, growing beyond anything I had ever imagined, and I found a sense of fulfillment in watching something I had built from the ground up flourish. But more than that, I found fulfillment in the quiet moments. The dinners around the table, the late-night talks, the mornings spent in bed with Jack by my side. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't the kind of life that made headlines, but it was mine, and I had never been happier. One evening, years after the dust from the scandal had long settled, I found myself reflecting on the journey I had been on. I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, much like I had done so many times before. But this time I wasn't alone. Jack was next to me, his arm draped casually around my shoulders, and the kids were inside, laughing about something I couldn't quite hear. The sound of their laughter filled the air, mixing with the soft breeze, and I realized that this simple, beautiful moment was everything I had ever wanted. I thought back to the woman I had been all those years ago, the one who had been so shattered by David's betrayal. She had felt lost, broken, unsure of how she would ever pick up the pieces of her life. But through it all, she had found her way. She had found love again, not just in Jack, but in herself. She had learned that she was strong, capable, and worthy of the happiness she had once thought was out of reach. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I had come full circle, and the life I had built was one that I was proud of. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real and it was mine. Jack glanced over at me, sensing my quiet reflection. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice soft. "Just thinking," I said with a smile, "about how far we've come, about how lucky I am." Jack smiled, pulling me closer. "We're both lucky," he said. "We built this life together." And as I sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew he was right. We had built something beautiful out of the broken pieces of the past. And for that, I was endlessly grateful. Because in the end, life isn't about the things that break you, it's about the things you build from the pieces. And I had built a life worth living. The years continued to pass, and with each one, I found myself more and more at peace with the journey I had been on. My life, once filled with the chaos of public scandal and heartbreak, had settled into a rhythm that felt right. It wasn't always easy. Life never is. But it was filled with love, laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. Jack and I continued to grow together, learning new things about each other even after years of marriage. The kids grew up, becoming their own people, and watching them find their way in the world was one of the greatest joys of my life. My boutique expanded, my friendships deepened, and I continued to learn, and years had passed since the scandal that rocked my world. Since Diddy's infamous party set off a chain of events that changed everything. It was strange to think about how one seemingly harmless evening had triggered the collapse of my marriage, how a single post from that night had pulled back the curtain on a life that had been held together by lies. I rarely thought about that time anymore. My life had moved so far beyond the chaos of those headlines, and David was nothing more than a figure from my past. But every now and then, when a Diddy track played on the radio or I saw his name in the news, I couldn't help but be reminded of the night everything unraveled. It wasn't with bitterness anymore, just a strange sense of how life works in unexpected ways. That night, and everything that followed, had been painful, but it had also set me on a path toward a life I never would have found otherwise. One day, while out shopping, I overheard two women talking at the next table in a cafe. They were gossiping about some new celebrity scandal, something about a secret relationship being exposed at a party. I smiled to myself as I listened, remembering how that had once been my life, how I had once been at the center of a storm like that. I sipped my coffee and thought back to Diddy's party, the night that changed everything. What had seemed like a disaster back then had become the turning point I hadn't known I needed. In a way, I owed that night a strange kind of gratitude. It had forced me to confront the truth, to face the lies that had been hidden for too long. But most of all, it had set me free. I stood up to leave the cafe, glancing once more at the women still deep in conversation. They had no idea how familiar their gossip was to me, but that was okay. That part of my life was behind me now, and I was grateful for the journey that had brought me here. Because in the end, Diddy's party wasn't just the night everything fell apart. It was the night my real life began.